Sunday morning coding stream. What are we doing? I'm gonna turn that music down a little bit. Just a little bit. It's so hard to get it just right. I feel like I'm always fiddling with it. 4%? Oh, no. Cannot left arrow there. Okay, well, 5% I'll have to do. Alright. Well, what are we even doing today? What is the plan? I think the plan... At least the first thing to do, I think last time we were working on loading skeletons, which are basically what you see when you, let's see, can we see an example of that? So if we, yeah, it's hard to see there, but there's a flash before the data loads in, where there's like little gray boxes where all the fields are. Oh, interesting. Oh, I see. Yeah, it's this data from Open Food Facts did not have these values. Okay, that makes sense. It's hard to show an example of that in. Let's see if we go to settings, maybe. No, that's basically instant. Oh, I shouldn't have clicked that. That doesn't go anywhere. Yeah, so really briefly you can see some of the loading skeleton stuff for the consumption UI. Probably in Storybook is probably easier way. I think we have some examples of this thing. Or we used to, I guess. Right. So we had a thing before where there was a state that you would pass in to the consumption component to say it was loading, and then we had like something somewhere in here where we would dispatch out to our placeholder, our skeleton for the consumption UI. But yeah, so here it is, consumption loading. So that prop went away, and instead we're using that component inside of the connected component for consumption. So like the part that's connected to Redux and is also doing the tRPC calls to fetch data in, if it's loading, then we use the consumption loading component instead of the real one. And so that's how we're dealing with that. But that means that our old story showing that skeleton is no longer part of this. What we could really do, I guess, is we could do, hold on, this is not enough real estate for me. Okay, there we go. It seems like it's not good practice, the way Storybook is set up, to have stories for multiple components, even if they're related components in one story file. I guess we could just add another. So here's a downside of kind of this approach that I've taken for structuring things, right? So we have our consumption component in this folder. We have a components folder, and then various levels of kind of abstraction of those components, like from the most granular, most lowest level components to then ones that build on top of them. And I'm not completely sold on this. This is something I saw a couple of articles about when I was thinking about how to set up the project, and thought, give it a shot, see how that plays out in an app that's not too complex, or at least I didn't think it was going to be that complex at the outset, but also not, super simple where there's like one component or just, a handful. Somewhere in the middle. So, and then I've set up VS Code here to nest my stories. So these, like if we were to look in File Explorer, in organisms, it's just a bunch of files, right? The VS Code here is set up to kind of nest the related things together, and that's going off of like the it's basically saying, oh, if there's something .tsx, if there's also a same thing but .stories.tsx or .styles.ts, that those should be kind of related to that file. So we could do something like, what did I actually call the, whoops, that's not what I wanted, but that's fine. Consumption loading, right? So if we just call this consumption loading .stories.tsx, it's not nested under there, which is, that doesn't matter. That's just to make it easier to find all the things and cluster them together and hide them when you don't want to see them. But that does mean that unless we want to change the rules somehow, and I don't know how we do that. I wonder. No, this wouldn't work either, right? If we did consumption.loading.stories, it still wouldn't nest it. And we could do that. Like that could be a thing, like consumption, the consumption component here. We could have a consumption.loading component, and that could make sense. But that doesn't get us anything in terms of this anyway. And I don't know that it really matters. Just kind of thinking about the implications of that. So if we wanted to have a consumption loading story, we could do that, right? So we can have a basic story. Now, do we want to do this? Probably not. I suspect that this is something that's not going to make sense for reasons that I'll get into. So if I save that, so then we have this, and now we can see what the skeleton looks like in Storybook, and so that's a benefit of doing this. But maybe it would make more sense to have the Storybook story cover the connected component. Or maybe both, right? So I was thinking about this earlier, actually, thinking about what we might be doing this morning. I did give it a little bit of thought before the start of the stream. And yeah, I think maybe it could be interesting to, let me take a step back. So we have a thing in the backlog here to add story and interaction tests for connected diary component. And thinking about interaction testing. So when I say interaction testing, I'm talking about specifically a kind of testing that you can do within Storybook, within this play method, where you can interact with the component, and you can check to, you can use an assertion to check that certain things behave in certain ways, that you get certain results when you do certain steps, right? So when we so like for instance, when we click within the menu, this text, whatever UI element has this text, then we expect after we wait for a menu to be hidden that certain things will be Like we'll be able to find this text within the serving size select div. Apparently, you know, these things, these behaviors that we're describing, because of these interactions, we're checking that that's happening. So where am I going with this? Well, so I think it's interesting to have Storybook stories for kind of the pure components where there's no expectation of state, because then you can just plug things in. And so like if we look at our add story, we can definitely like edit the values here, and we can, you know, see how the UI behaves when we do that. Versus, do I feel like I should have an example somewhere of, not there, obviously. Don't I have I think there was a story somewhere where I actually had like mock, nope, not there, edit consumption. Yeah, so there were some places where I was definitely, let's see if we can find one of these. Right, so where we are mocking Redux, or where we're setting up Redux and kind of stubbing in, yeah, we're providing a provider, we're dispatching things, and we're using this tRPC wrapper around, or wrapper's not the right word, but a utility to set up things in mock service worker to be able to handle tRPC requests that the client is making without them needing a server to respond to those requests, right? So like in this story, we're testing, or we are demoing, maybe is a way of putting it, the logged food actions dialog, right? And so about organisms. So here's a dialogue. But the way this dialogue works is that it's supposed to be pulling information from the backend about your user settings to figure out what your meals are, to give you options for which meal to move the item to. And I had a point somewhere in here. So yeah, I guess I'm of two minds about this, right? Because this component, right. Okay, so let's look at this component that we're showing a story of. So there's a connected logged food actions dialog, right? So this wraps our pure component, passes in props, and hooks it up to Redux. That's what's going on here. And then inside of it, there's the actual kind of just the component that takes the props and produces the actual UI elements. So there's some value in having a story that demos, that shows this component, and you can interact with it, either to understand what the component does, or if you're working on the component and you want to test things out, there's value in that. I think there's also value in kind of these connected components, especially when we get into kind of this case we started on with the consumption component, where depending on the state, we'll actually render out different things. We'll render out a consumption loading component versus the real one, right? And so if you only have a story that allows you to pass in different props to consumption, you're not seeing the full story, if you will. So that's me kind of thinking out loud about about this, and I don't know, what do I want to do here? I don't think I don't want to say it doesn't make sense to have like this story, because it does, in the sense that we can at least look at what's going on in it. But I don't want to add one of these files for every little thing. I think I might rather have like, okay, well, we have the story for consumption, right? And there are tests that are failing right now, probably because I changed things. There we go. Runs. Can you rerun? Oh, it fails. Interesting. This is probably okay. Probably because I changed something. That's kind of neat. That you can, that the changes to the controls that you put in persist through. Okay, so if I rerun this, okay, now it passes. Good. So that's neat. That's something to keep in the back pocket in terms of designing these interaction tests, is that you could experiment with different inputs and see how that changes the behavior. But yeah, that's not something that, I guess, yeah, that's a question, right? So if we had a story that was using the connected component, right? Then if we look at the connected component, I think like most of the data it gets, like it does get props for various things, but a lot of the data it gets is from the back end, essentially, either directly or through Redux. So like food.status loading or meal.status loading. So it would be difficult to, I don't know, actually, honestly. I don't know if there would be a good way to make it so that you could, within Storybook, change those things, right? So like if we go back to logged food actions, we have this, but there are no controls. Is there anything that we can do? Add-on interaction. Maybe there could be an add-on to do this, but basically, like in this story for logged food actions, there's no way in the Storybook UI, the way it's set up now anyway, to change this, right? It's just these values are hard-coded in to pass into mock service worker. And I bet you could make something that will let you change these, but it's that's kind of a so what you'd want to do if you wanted to kind of like explore different variations, I guess you could just have separate stories in the file. How would we even test? How would we even see the loading skeleton? Like if we were on consumption, right? Or pretend this. Well, let's just go back here, right? So let's say this story was actually about getting, like, it was actually using the connected component. And so we weren't passing in this data through controls. Instead, it was being passed in through the params for mock service worker. Then how would we see the loading skeleton here, right? So how would we tell tRPC mock service worker to just like pretend it's loading forever? Okay, so this just gives us the same things that are defined in get user settings. So we can query, sure. Oh, I think I see how. Yes. So if we did res dot, okay, not once. Okay, we can do this. What options do we have here? Oh, it doesn't know. It's any. Huh. Okay. Put that back for now. So this tRPC mock service worker. How does it work? And can we make it so that we can simulate just like a stuck request essentially? This might be something. I'm guessing like the request and response and context stuff is maybe coming from mock service worker. Get input. There's a link to there. Okay, we'll look at that next. Yeah, it returns a proxy that infers types from your app router. That makes sense. Yep. Okay, so mock service worker, how do you work? I recall that I looked at this for maybe, I think between mock service worker and mock service worker tRPC for like less than an hour when I was like, oh, this will work. And then I added it. And it has worked for kind of the stubbing out data coming from a mock backend, as this does. Okay, that's all about like Node.js. So ctx.delay status. Okay, so this looks familiar. So I'm guessing that what we're seeing from our tRPC mock service worker API is actually just the mock service worker API. So do they have docs? They also have recipes. Response resolver. What if we just want to response? Here we go. Property name, status text binding headers delay. Okay, and then context looks important. And we can do this. Delay. Random realistic server response time. What if you... What if you just didn't return? Like, we'll stub this out. Yeah, let's comment there. Color. And then we, in Storybook, if we go back to the actual thing that we're experimenting with. Okay, so it... Can we see the mock service worker? 404 not found. Let's see. What can we do here? Never return. Okay, just delay a really long time is the proposed solution by Copilot. why did the request go through then? Get user settings, account get user settings. Huh, interesting. Let me unwind all this really quick. I broke it. This was working, and now it's not getting anything. It's interesting that capture request without a matching request handler. Maybe this is something where we just need to restart Storybook. Yeah, unable to index, missing export. Oh, weird. Well, if we can do that, hold on. Let's just delay a lot. Now let's try this again. I want to see if this will work. Ooh. We detect you're using the following add-ons in versions which are known to be incompatible. Okay. Looks like it was merged. 3.0. Okay. A new version is available. Of course there's a new version available. Dark mode. 3. Two months ago. Okay. Anyway. That's not what I'm looking for. Logged food actions. It's still broken. How have I managed to break this? Oh, right. Well, I added the delay. To be fair, I added the delay. And we don't have any kind of loading indicator here, but if we did, although it's interesting that the there is a request going through and hitting a 404. I would think that was not supposed to happen. Let's see if we take out the delay, if this works again, or if we just managed to break it fully somehow. It's interesting. Mocking enabled. Are we not mocking soon enough? Mott tRPC. Storybook tRPC provider. Query client. Huh. Yeah, I know it's deprecated, but initialize MSW. This was working. Apparently looking too closely at it broke it. Hold on, I'm gonna let's see. I guess I'll do that package upgrade too while I'm here. Sealing? What are we sealing? Okay, so we're trying to figure out why. Okay, interesting. I've really not changed anything else. I did put it back where it was, right? Yeah, the only thing that's been changed is this story. So why this was working when we started? What's happened? Huh. Okay. Well, if I can't even get that to work, maybe trying to spend a bunch of time on using mock service worker to test out loading state is not such a good idea. Jeez. What have I done that has broken this? I've obviously, something has changed in the order that things have started up. Right? Presumably that's what's happening, is that like we don't have mocking enabled soon enough. Right? So we're trying to do this request prior to mocking being enabled. I don't know why that suddenly decided to change the order that it happens in, but okay. Well, maybe it'll be obvious to me later if I just stew on it for a bit. So let's move on, because the thing I wanted to do first is add more loading skeletons. So we have a story that kind of demos one over here. Are there any other components where we really need to add this though? That was the kind of the thing that, like, this says add more loading skeletons to prevent layout changes. That was the ask. But are there? So I guess we could run through not the pages, because these are mostly empty. I've not fleshed these out yet. Diary is the big thing. Maybe. Although, is there anything in here? No, that's blank. So which component is this? So this is in templates. Again, if I have to look at the reference to figure out which part in the hierarchy the component is, maybe this is not such a good idea. But just give it a try. The structure. Okay, so the diary component here is essentially a connected component, right? So we're doing Redux stuff here, and then we're wrapping diary basic. I see. And that's over in organisms. And what this does is this shows kind of a heading and nav, which is this part right here, and then it iterates over meals. So right, this view here would show meals, but there weren't any defined. So is this another thing that's broken? Yeah, so it's supposed to be fetching data, but mocking enabled happens after. Is there something we can do to make this happen sooner? Because this seems like this is going to be... there we go. Music's a little loud for me right now. Yeah, define mocks, install. Sure. Integrate. Browser. Configure worker. Start worker. Yeah. MSW Storybook add-on. Maybe... Let's go look at that add-on. Last updated 3 months ago. Is this over? Initialize. Here's their GitHub. Okay, well, whatever this issue is, it's not the one. I don't think it's the one we're having. Nah, okay. Leaves the add-on in a bad state. What is a bad state? Mocking enable. No, okay. Story not waiting for MSW to be ready before running. Hey, that sounds familiar. Instead of doing this in your preview.js file, do this. Yeah, I don't know what loaders are. Let's see. PR's merge schedule release will happen soon. Quite a few changes. Support for 7.0. Okay, maybe there have been releases. Looks like the release is. Hold on. So there's 1.8. So what version are we on? Yay! It's more. We're on 1.8. Okay. Was this March 8? When was that discussion? November 2020. Okay. There are pre-releases. We could try a pre-release, see if it somehow fixes the issue. Or we could try the thing that issue suggested. Oh, npm is being slow. Okay. Wait. Yeah, that's the right one. Versions. There is a next with 42 downloads. We can try it. Just go ahead and stop that. npm install again. All right. One, let's see if this works at all. Two, see if this fixes our issue. Okay, so we were looking at logged food actions. So that's interesting, right? So the mock service worker stuff should have already been set up before we started navigating around, right? Right, so mocking enabled. But if we navigate around, like the mocking should be enabled now. So this should be working, yet it's not. Okay, so if it's not going to fix our issue, we're going to downgrade again. We're going to try the other thing they suggested, which was a thing that may or may not work. Decorators. MSW decorator. So we're going to get rid of that. MSW loader. I don't know if Storybook will handle us changing this file. Well, it's interesting that on the one hand, mocking was enabled prior to the request, which looks good. It doesn't seem to fix the issue though. Maybe we've been chasing something that's not the cause of the problem. What was the other page that we were on? Were we on diary template? Wait. So logged food action. Logged food actions. So did we just change how this worked? Is that what? Okay, so it takes meals. Select meals. Yeah. So the reason this is different. But how do we see it working before? Maybe there was something cached. Because right. So hold on. Let's take a few steps back. Oh yeah, the story's right there. Go figure. No, okay, so we do dispatch open dialog. We do okay, get user settings. So how does logged food actions work? It should be iterating over meals, right? To list all the different meals that you can move your food item to, your consumption. Yeah. And then those meals are coming from select meals from the settings slice, right? And so in the story, we are dispatching fetch settings, which under the hood is a thunk that it should be calling get user settings, which apparently it is. We're seeing in the log get user settings being requested. And we should be returning that here. So if you look at the definition for fetch settings, it's a thunk that calls get user settings and returns that result. And then presumably in our settings slice, we have extra reducer that when it's fulfilled, we set settings to be the payload. And then the select meals, right, is the one that was being used. It reads settings from state and gets Is that right? But wouldn't this get state.settings.settings? Is that what we are storing? Settings? What is this? Okay, so settings. Oh no, it is, right? Because the whole slice is called settings, right? So in the global state in Redux, there's a key called settings, and then inside of that is all of this. So it really is settings.settings. Okay. So settings.settings.meals. Yeah. Huh. Can we? We still have the Redux add-on, right? No store found. Oh, okay. There it is. Ooh. There was an error. JSON.parse unexpected character line 1 column 1 of the JSON data. Settings fetch pending. Settings fetch pending. Diary fetch rejected. Okay. Settings fetch rejected. That makes sense, right? So we made this request and we get a 404 and its response wasn't JSON. So why capture request without a matching request handler? API, tRPC, yada yada yada. Please create a request handler. Huh. So why did this stop working? Well. Yeah, it's not going to tell us anything. Let's go back to MSW Storybook add-on. Static DIRs. Huh. Main. Yeah, I have static DIRs. Worker directory, yeah. Public. That should be right, yeah, public. That's where the mock service worker.js is. And in Storybook, main. Yeah, links to those articles I was talking about before in terms of the inspiration for this structure for how the components are laid out. Read me. When running Storybook, you have to serve the public folder as an asset to Storybook so that the MSW is included, otherwise it's not available to the browser. I mean, I think that it's working fine. Yeah, lots of warnings, but yeah, MSW mocking enabled. Worker scope, localhost 6006. Mock service worker.js. Yeah, that exists. Warning capture requests. Yeah, and we should just ignore those. API tRPC diary, list consumptions by meal, get user settings. Okay, let me, so this is all has to do with how mock service workers integrated with Storybook. Maybe the MSW tRPC, which I already had open. There's something more I need to do here. Base path API tRPC. Whoops. Okay. We'll match all requests to base path regardless of host. Should this be different? I mean, this looks like it should be right, yeah, because we are requesting API tRPC. You'd think so. What if I just did this? Mux tRPC. We are pulling this in, yeah? Yeah, import tRPC MSW from Mux tRPC. And then we use that to define mocked requests. Well, I don't know. I don't know why this has stopped working at some point. The question is, how long ago did this stop working and we just didn't notice? Here's a thought. We're using chromatic. I wonder, one, if maybe I have been accepting these broken changes accidentally, or if it's actually working properly in Chromatic when the Storybook runs are done. So if we look at logged food actions, oh yeah, we can't see anything. Oh no, it works and it's broken. Can we look at a different build? Okay, we can look at main. So here's main. How many builds do we have to go back before it was working? Like showing multiple results. Oh boy. What's 203? Has it been broken the entire time? Well, how long ago was build 203? Let's see. Are those build numbers from actions? If so, that was quite a while ago, wasn't it? Not that long ago. 202. 203. 3 weeks ago. 3 streams ago. I guess we can't go back any further, can we? Well, that's unfortunate. Or can we? So if I go into this build, logs for this one have expired. Sure. But this was for a PR, right? And we had checks. We have UI tests. Build 180. Show me logged food actions. 170. How far back can we go? Let's see. So if we look at logged food action stories, history, 3 weeks ago. Save work from last 2 streams. Great. Brilliant. Very helpful commit message there. That's when we added this. Okay, so this story has not existed for too long. And maybe it's been broken. Yeah, I wonder how long this mock service worker stuff has been broken then. So this was in this commit. Was this in a pull request? Or did I must have pushed it directly to main. Did we have... Maybe that predates us having... well, no, I don't... I think the chromatic stuff doesn't run on commits that are pushed to main, just on the PRs. So, unfortunately, maybe... Okay, so what date was that? 3 weeks ago, as in, click. No, hover. There we go, May 21st. There was a storybook publish on the 21st after that commit. So here we go. What is this gonna do? Let's see, logged food actions. Yeah. Oh, hey, look. The tRPC 500, yeah, no kidding. Storybook published, there we go. Oh no, this is gonna be the same thing. What we need are the snapshot, like the UI tests. because that'll be like a static image of the stories at that point in time. Which, if the mock tRPC stuff was working, that would capture like multiple things. Okay, so pretty weird. Also really weird because we saw it working. Like at the very beginning of the stream, I had opened, yeah, too many tabs. I'd opened this, and I feel like it said breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And, yeah. And then suddenly it stopped working. Surely it cannot be... Was that... Okay. I think... I'm going to go back to what I said maybe 40 minutes ago. Which is, I'm gonna put a pin in this for now, and we're going to actually... go back to working on skeletons. Right, and we're trying to figure out what components also needed more loading skeletons. Which ones make sense to add beyond the consumption one? I think the consumption one makes sense. There's it's a kind of a big panel of data that is going to like relay out itself when data comes in, so we would kind of have the placeholders for it, so that the UI does not, jiggle and jank around as data loads in. So if there are any other places where it makes sense to do the same sort of thing, then I think that would be a good target. Like this is probably not, because so that this is its own skeleton. This UI element, we're not going to show different parts of the UI depending on the data. Like we are always showing these things for this UI element, even if there's a null there, right? But for things like maybe diary meal, right? If we're loading, does it make sense to have placeholders? Right, so if we remove entries, this is what it looks like initially. We can have a load. There is a, oh yeah, great. Loading. Brilliant. Let's work on this one next then. So molecules diary meal. So we have the connected diary meal that provides some wrappers around dispatching some actions or routing, and we're also reading status from Redux, either loading or error. And right now we're just passing that loading state into diary meal. So the question here is, we could, I think we're already looking at the loading state here. What we did in the consumption component was we essentially lifted these elements out to the connected component. And then showed them instead of the wrapped component if there was an error or if we were loading. Why would we, or why wouldn't we do the same thing here? I think one thing is, in terms of the components that are here, their layout is not going to change based on the data that's loaded in. It's really going to be the diary meal entry. I think one thing you could do is you'd actually make this component a prop of diary meal. I don't know if you would or wouldn't still want to pass in a loading state to this component, but you could then pass a different, like a skeleton component instead of this diary meal entry to change its behavior effectively, or change how it renders out. I mean, alternatively, you just dig this deeper. You pass loading into this component, and this component decides how to show loading state. But that doesn't really make any sense, does it? Because like if we're loading data, we don't know what the meal entries are yet, right? So you could imagine that instead the connected component would pass in a different entries component and then pass in some fake data. That doesn't sound like a good idea, though. On the other hand, I really dislike the idea of like redoing, copying and pasting all of the UI to make a skeletonized version of it. What we could do instead is we could have, you know, a conditional thing here that says if we're loading, show, you know, some number of diary meal entry skeletons. Otherwise, do this. That's also an option. So we would continue to pass in kind of loading and error information into diary meal for it to render out. I probably will get rid of this line and instead rely on the fact that we'll have the skeletons here in the body to reflect that, the fact that we're loading. In fact, I guess what we could do is we could do something like, no, we can't do that because of course meal and entries, and here's another con for passing a loading boolean into this component. So meal, what is meal? It's this type, right? It's some data. It's got ID and labels and entries, but if we're loading, then we're not actually going to have this. And so this type is already just wrong, right? The data that we're passing in doesn't exist if we're loading, right? So like we're passing in meal here that we're getting from, oh, interesting, it's being passed in. So what is, I guess the diary is loading? What does that mean? Oh, right. So in a parent component, we have a selector where we're reading out the diary information. Yeah, that's kind of weird, actually. Can we? Where are we using diary meal? Let's look at this. Let's really think about this. Okay, so in this component, this higher level component, organism versus molecule, and this hierarchy of components, So we're looping over meals. All right, so this is like breakfast, lunch, dinner, right? And we are passing in that particular meal. Okay, that starts to make sense. So that's interesting. Okay, because if we're loading, meals is going to be an empty array, right? Wherever this is being used from, I guess there's it's template diary. Right, diary basic here refers to this one, the second tab. And we're passing in meals, and it's reading it from the store, right? So if that's still loading, because this is, right, we're dispatching fetch diary, and that's a thunk. So when it's first called, our loading state is going to be loading, right? So, yeah. It's kind of weird. Not sure if I like this. Okay, and so this component takes the fact that we have this list of meals and then starts rendering out things like navigation, and then the individual like breakfast, lunch, dinner, or whatever the user is configured as their daily meals are, and then you see the items that have been eaten within those, and this then renders out an individual one, and we've used another connected component so we'd be able to dispatch actions mainly, although we also have loading state here, because why? Because why? Meal label, loading error. So that's interesting. So that's implying that, right, so right here we only have one meal. If we had multiple meals here, it would say loading breakfast, loading lunch, loading dinner, I believe. Right. So this is diary meal. So if we were in diary, and this was working, if the mock service worker stuff was working, we would see like the individual meals, and if it was still loading, it would say loading before each one, and that's kind of weird. It's a lot of weird stuff going on here. How old is some of this stuff? Oh, right, I don't have that extension in this. What extension is that gives you like the, it might be get lens or something? I missed that. Okay, anyway. So what are we going to do about all of this weirdness? It feels like maybe what we should do is... So the two things, two kind of approaches here, right? And I think I already said I really dislike the idea of like reproducing the same like table structure multiple places for having like loading skeletons for elements that are like, we could just take this and use this. Until we get down to like the level of what the diary meal entry. Let's add a fourth tab here. All right, so kind of going right to left from highest level to lowest level. Diary meal entry is the individual table row in the table that represents like here's something you consumed within a meal. And at this point, it probably makes sense to have a loading version of this UI element, like a skeleton, basically. And then in diary meal, maybe it makes sense to have a way to pass in which component you should use here, right? And so then we would probably get rid of the loading and error props. I don't think it makes sense to have them at this level. And then instead, we would pass in the component that we're going to use. And I know I said, oh, meal entries is going to be empty. Well, we will choose to, in the next level up, or at some point here, right, so we're passing in meal here, which presumably has entries. This is the next level up, right? Molecule and then organisms. Yeah, so we would... Do we have a... Is this where we show, like, loading and error state? Will we always have a date? Well, the type seems to suggest that that's the case. Seems to suggest that. And if we look at the template where we're using that component, date is coming from these props. And I think ultimately it's coming from like Next.js / the URL or whatever, maybe. I think we should always have these props, except for maybe user ID. Or yeah, anyway. So except for maybe name. Name might not be there. What are we doing with username here? Okay. Diary meal. So maybe we should have like loading state here, right? So we could pass in a loading prop at this level. Or we provide another component here or alongside it here, like diary.loading, that we would have available. And then this could use that if we're loading, right? Because this is a connected component. We're going to have access to that loading state. Maybe that makes the most sense. So then we would have like a... So we have a function diary loading. Sure, something like that. And ooh, we could have an error one too. We could do that. And then we could say diary dot loading equals that. How much do you dislike that? Property loading doesn't exist on FC diary props. Look. Does that make you happy, Typescript? Okay. Date does not exist on... Oh, hey, hello, Burke Mackie. I have been told that I sound often like a teacher. You can definitely ask a question. And thank you for the follow. Ask away. And let me know if I've taken your pronunciation, the pronunciation of your name too far. I don't know exactly how that's supposed to be said. Are we customizing custom hooks by ourselves, or are they provided by React like useState and useEffect? Custom hooks by yourselves, are they provided by React? Which custom hooks are you referring to? Maybe useSelector. So these are coming from Redux. Use dispatching useSelector. And then in the case of use selector, what this is doing is that it knows where the Redux state is, and so we can provide our own functions that tell Redux essentially how to pick out of the global state the data elements we want to be able to render out. Does that answer your question? So it's a ready-made thing, right? We're not writing a hook from scratch in custom hooks. No. So the let's see, where was I? Right. So these hooks are coming from this library, Redux. Specifically the React Redux package, right? So that is essentially like the convenience wrappers and utilities and hooks in this case to be able to leverage Redux within the context of, in a general sense, the context of a React application. Yeah, like use fetch. I mean, that also sounds like a hook. Yeah, so this is not our code. This is code from the React Redux package. Like if I hit F12, it's from node modules, etc., etc. Not stuff I wrote. Okay, so what was I trying to do here, right? So we started changing this level of the diary to provide these other components that will be rendered in these different states, so that here, so effectively what I'm doing is I'm lifting up this kind of this information about loading an error up, right? So that we don't need it here anymore. So this is all going to go away. And so that we don't need, yeah, so we won't pass that in, which means we don't need this. We will need this up a level or two, right? So in this component, I'm wrong. Please tell me how I am wrong. When you tried use per K, it worked? Sure. Yeah, you could definitely write custom hooks to do whatever you want. I'm not saying that we couldn't do that here as well. I'm saying that for the code that we have right now, it's using these hooks provided by Redux. They are custom hooks, but they're not custom hooks from React. They are from the Redux project. Laxative Phi, old Angel Fire Cities web developer here. What are hooks exactly in React? Oh boy. What is a hook? That is an interesting question that you've asked. You didn't mean my use case? Fair enough. What is a hook? Interesting. The first result is actually from Redux, from React Redux, but that's not where it's actually from. So, oh, it's because I searched for Redux. I got Redux on the mind. Yeah, it's ChatGPT. Yeah, I can't compete with ChatGPT. These docs are old and won't be updated. That's very helpful. So, like several versions of React now ago, hooks were added as a way to be able to manage state without having to essentially, like older versions. It's a long story. In past versions of React, you would often write components with classes, and you would have like component lifecycle, and you would manage state that way. And so if you wanted to have here they have a counter, right? Or if you wanted to have like a Boolean flag or something in your component to keep track of like, is this checkbox checked? Local state within a component. You would have, you would use a class-based component to set that up, and it was boilerplate. And in React 16.8, like it says right here, they added this thing to basically allow you to call a function essentially within like a function-based component. So like the thing that also renders out the JSX that becomes rendered into the DOM, you can just call a function, and it just works. It gives you a reference to a value that you can render out, and it gives you a way to set that value in like a callback. So I think this is a really simple example of how you would use a hook. But you can build upon that to do a bunch of other things. So in the case, it's a pre-made function you can borrow, so you don't have to reinvent one, like updating the virtual DOM. That is kind of scratching the surface. I mean, ultimately, React is that. Right? React is not inventing the wheel, so you don't have to update the virtual DOM. React does that for you. But specifically, like if you're keeping track of any kind of local state, if you're talking about like, oh, you need to save something to a database or something, that's bigger. But if we're talking about, what's a good example in this app? I don't have really good examples here. Because hooks do a lot more than just like give you a way to manipulate state. Here's a bunch of hooks that I'm using right here. I'm using use dispatch and use effect and use selector. These are all hooks provided. So use effect is a hook provided by React. Use dispatch and use selector will be provided by this other library called Redux to do various things. So how all that works is something that I don't have enough time to get into, and I had to pull up docs and stuff to explain. But what we're using these for here is a bit easier to explain. Sort of, except that then I have to explain Redux. So there's a bunch of things in motion here in order to make this application, which I don't think I've shown the application in a bit. So this is the app Daily Joule that I'm working on here, and so it's kind of this interactive thing where you can search for food items, and so we can search for like my favorite organic ginger thingies. It's all the way to the bottom, ginger cubes. So you can select that item, say how many servings, serving size. Let's just say I want 1 serving, and I can add it to, I selected breakfast, so, and you can add it to your diary, and done, right? And then you can like move it to a different meal, and all of this, and then ultimately be able to be like, how much did I eat today? That sort of thing, right? And you can switch between days. And then eventually I'll have like a thing where you can have friends and various things. There's various settings for like setting up like calorie goals and stuff. So this component that I'm looking at right here is the component that like renders that view that we're just looking at, where it's showing like, here's today's diary of what we've eaten. And so I'm use dispatch here to ask Redux essentially to give me this function that I can call to dispatch actions. And so actions are basically representing, if I perform an action in the UI, hence the name, like click this button, that dispatches an action to do a thing. When I first load this page, I'm leveraging this use effect hook to say that when this component is mounted, that is when the component becomes something that is should be rendered to the screen, I should dispatch fetch diary. So that's what tells the front end to ask the back end for the data to populate this view. And then a bunch of stuff happens behind the scenes. And then I use these hooks for use selector to say, hey, I have a bunch of data, or rather, Redux has a bunch of data for me in the front end. I have these custom functions that I've written that say how to find the specific data that I'm interested in, like diary meals, the current user's name, because I could actually be looking at someone else's diary, or the status. Did we load it successfully? Is it still loading? That sort of thing. And so these functions I've written because I know how the data is structured. Way up here, I've defined kind of this diary state data structure. This is how I've constructed my code to pull the data from the backend and save it in the front end in the user's browser. And then I've written these functions to say how to pick out the pieces of data that I'm interested in. Like we're loading if the diary loading state is pending, or I guess I don't have, yeah, so like the list of meals is at diary.meals, those sorts of things, right? And so I'm pulling out these pieces of information, and then I'm passing them into a child component. And the reason I'm doing it this way, as opposed to like, I could just take all this stuff and just have one component that like has all the divs and basically just have one thing. But besides that being maybe a little longer than I want and kind of like a lot on the screen at once, I'm separating the idea of how I get the data and what data, like the connectedness to the Redux store. I'm keeping that separate from then how is that represented on the screen, right? And in this case, I'm splitting that between like, here's the general concept of the diary page has like a heading, and it has a navigation component, and then it has the different meals. And I'm just, mapping, iterating over the meals, essentially taking the meals and converting them into these components. And then lower down, then I am saying, okay, now for a given meal, how do I render out this table that has all this information, right? And so keeping those things separated helps me stay sane in the long term. So that's an overview of kind of where we're at and what we're doing. And so what I'm trying to do right now, though, is kind of continue in that same vein of organization where I don't want a lot of the detail about, oh, are we loading, are we not loading, to find its way all the way down into these components that are responsible for like showing a UI. At the same time, I also don't want to copy and paste a bunch of this structure to be able to make kind of placeholder loading skeletons, which are things like, if I go over here to my area where I'm working on demoing what things look like. So in a different component, I have kind of this loading skeleton that has like placeholders that indicate oh, this is loading, right? So to be able to do that, to some extent, I want to I want to take advantage of the UI component that's here, but I don't want to introduce a bunch of like, oh, if we're loading, show a placeholder thing. If we're not loading, show another thing. I don't want a bunch of that extra conditional logic all the way down here at the bottom. So I think the way I'm going to accomplish that is how. So what I've done so far is I did take this part where we're reading the loading state from, I think it was down in this component, and I'm lifting it up. So the way I have these tabs here is that the one on the furthest left is kind of the lowest level component, where it's actually rendering out a row of a table, and then up a level, this is where we're rendering out the whole table for like a meal, right? And then a level above, this is essentially basically the whole page, right? We're showing like a heading and nav and then all of those tables. And then above that, here's where we're like pulling in the data to feed it to that component. I'm often wrong. Can you be more specific? Yeah, of course. Explaining also gives me a chance to, like, in the back of my head, think about what I'm doing. Oh yeah, no. I've the meme is like it's an iceberg. But it's just like an infinite well of like there's always just more stuff there. And we do this to ourselves, right? Ooh, thank you for the follow. Really appreciate it. We're working our way to our goal of 20 followers. I am sometimes also correct. But yeah, there's a lot. And there's ever more as we do things like, oh, well, if I add an abstraction, it becomes easier to think about this one thing. But then that's more stuff as well to be thinking about. Okay, so the path that we're on right now is I'm going to... I don't know yet. I think what I want to end up doing is passing loading and error to this thing that I'm calling diary basic, which is this tab number 3 here. And then this component is going to be... No. Is that right? That's not right, because I'm defining these loading and error states. So I think that what I was thinking before was that here... Okay, I think I know what I want to do. I'm going to rename this to connected diary. Good, and that updates the export as well. And then I can rename diary basic to just diary, hopefully, and that doesn't cause conflicts. Yeah, ChatGPT told you that hooks are basically just reusable functions. Yeah, sort of. There's they are more than that. But yeah, useState is really the hook outside of like this app where I'm using Redux, which is a whole other thing. You don't need to use Redux until you need to use Redux, and maybe even then you don't. But useState is probably the hook that you'll use the most. And then maybe useEffect as well, especially if you're doing things where you have like, if you want to do, I have some other places where not in this app, but in a different app. Actually, the app that I use for like my BRB and loading and into stream I actually have a web app for that, and I'm using useEffect there a bunch to do like calling out to like JavaScript it's doing like DOM manipulation stuff and things like that. So that's kind of also an escape hatch for some of that sometimes. Okay, right. So where I was going with this is that I'm going to import this thing, which I'm calling diary, which is this one from the organisms folder. And then what we're going to do is we're going to say if we're loading, then we'll use diary.loading. And then if error, we'll use that. And so its return type is void. Okay, that's wrong. So, oh, I see. Wait, didn't we have... Yeah, here we go. I'll just copy this one. So that's GitHub Copilot there. Providing some auto-completed code for us. You have a million questions. I also want to see code. Well, that is an interesting problem. An interesting problem, because I know if people ask me questions, I do want to try to like answer it. Let me think about how I could solve that in the future. Maybe we could do some kind of Q&A thing at some point. I am going to need to take a little bit of a break, though. I typically, on my streams, about every hour and a half, so about usually halfway through, because I tend to stream for 3 hours a session. About halfway through, I like to take a little break. This is so that I can refill my water, I can stretch my legs, just be healthy. So I'm going to do that now. If you want to ask questions, you can put them in the chat, and maybe I can answer some of them when I come back. Could be a thing. But yeah, I'll be back in just like 2, 3, 4 minutes, something like that. All right. BRB. All right, I'm back. Just one question. How many years have you worked with React and web developing in general? So React, probably easier to answer, I think. When did I first use React? Maybe 2016? Yeah, because I was heavily using AngularJS on things. Once that hit like 1.0. And then yeah, 2017 or 2018 started using React. I don't remember any projects before that I was using React on. And then web development in general. I think the first time I wrote HTML might have involved GeoCities. Yeah, so this is like 90s. But that wasn't, anything professional at the time. But yeah. A while. 20 plus years. To some extent, professionally. Yeah, time flies. But yeah, these Sunday streams are my excuse to spend some time with this project. In my day job, I don't have an opportunity to work on a lot of greenfield more UI focused things, where I'm like, to some extent doing things from scratch. I mean, I am using Material UI. When I started working on this app, I was not. I was actually like doing all of my UI components, but I decided that was a bridge too far for this. So yeah, so it's a fun, it's a chance one to do this on stream, to do some coding on stream. Although I do have some other coding projects that I probably do at some point. When this gets to the point where there's not a lot of additional things to do on it. Yeah, anyway. So back to this though. So the thought here is that, okay, we have a diary loading component and a diary error component, kind of nested inside of this. And so now this component doesn't need to pass loading or error into our unconnected diary component, nor does any child component need to pull that information out of Redux as well, right? So that's good. I think what's interesting here then is that this name, where is this coming from? Select name. It's coming from settings. Maybe what we should do, right? If we're already concerned about like the if this is loading, then show a loading thing. Maybe we should do a thing where we say settings loading equals use selector. There we go. So for this, how we're destructuring the result of getting the diary status information, what we can do instead is we can say diary loading. Is it, I always forget, is it this way? Yeah. Right, so the key that we're destructuring from the object that this returns is loading, and we're assigning that to a constant called diary loading. I guess we can also do diary error for consistency's sake. Right, and the whole point of that was to be able to say if, yeah, Copilot's got it. If diary is loading or settings is loading, we just want to say, okay, we're not ready to show the user anything yet. We're still loading things. And then that means that this weirdness around, oh, we'll just show in parentheses loading for the name can go away, which is good. All right, so then that's all well and good, right? So now we're deferring the responsibility of defining how these things will actually be rendered down a level, which is here. What we really want to do then is, we don't need these fragments here. We probably did at one point, but we don't need that as long as there's one element here, which there is, just a single div, so that's fine. But what we can do for, I'll leave the error thing here. We can do something fancy with, maybe at some point we'll do some kind of like fancy, like, you know, funny error thing. Oh, oops, you found the error kind of thing, as like a reusable component that we could then use here and other places. But that's another thing to do. Let me put that in the backlog. Actually, that could be good. I'll put that in the icebox. Show a friendly, funny error page when things break. Okay. But what we're focused on right now, trying to focus on right now, is how we handle the loading status, right? So, going to be a little bit of copy paste because we're going to take the same structure here. I don't think there's really a way around it. And we are going to say something like, what are we going to say? Diary loading for, okay, so let's see, consumption. Remind me how I use the skeleton things. Yeah, there's a skeleton component, right? Where does that get imported from? Oh, from material UI. Okay, that makes sense. So we have the skeleton component. It's provided by MUI, as I like to call it, which is this material UI library. And we'll do something where we'll do an actual width of, like, I don't know, 40 and a height of 20. We'll see how this turns out. Speaking of which, we should probably add a story for this. Let's just do that for a sec. And the component is diary.loading. And there doesn't need to be any homes. This can be just called basic. Right. And then diary nav. How's this gonna work? It's supposed to take a date and a function. Maybe we can just we'll just stub this out with another skeleton. We'll figure out the size of it in a minute. Yeah. Okay. And then I am going to want to put that back in a minute because I have some ideas for diary meal and how we'll do the loading for that. But for now, I just want to get something so that I can maybe put this side by side with there we go. Diary.loading. So that's what that looks like right now, which is not so great. Width 40, height 20. Let's see, variant, text. Okay. Okay. What do I need to do to have it in line? Is there a prop for that? You know, I should just look at the API docs. Yep. All right, so height, variant, width, component, variant text, fit content, height auto. Okay, maybe I should look at the demos then. Variants. For the variant text, adjust height via font size. What if I want... Confer dimensions? Sure. Maybe that's the issue. Like I want to have diary loading 4 and then this, and it just be on one line. Is that possible without much trouble? Well, let's take a closer look at what the skeleton component is doing. Okay, it's inside of our H2. It's a span. Display block. Okay. Let's just... Okay, that gets us part of the way there. And we just have to give it a width then. I don't know, 40? Okay, 140. Okay. I don't know that I want to say loading there though. I think we'll have the text match what's going on with the normal UI. Diary for someone. It's a mystery. As we load this view. Okay, and then all right, so okay, so we can get rid of width here, or wait, no, yes, get rid of width there. And what we're trying to kind of match up to, let me pull over the UI over here. So the goal here is to have a placeholder for some amount of this stuff, right? And so we do probably want a width. Let's see here. If we look at the nav here, it is about 47 tall. What's the actual width? So let's say 400 by 50. Oh wait, 50? I know what's messing me up. Height and then width. Let's say 350. Or I can type, really. Mm-hmm. Okay. And then what we want to do here is we want to use diary meal to render out the table. Right? So we want to use diary meal. Now we could, here's a thought, right? So I see a couple of different options here. One option would be to well, 3. The option that I don't want to do is to pass a loading boolean to this component. Really, technically, this component is what we're doing. I don't want to do that and pass it through and then do different things based on the loading boolean. The other thing we could do is to provide a, I guess it would really be like a connected diary meal.loading. component that we would use here. That provides kind of a nice interface that the parent component can use. Oh, we don't need that line anymore. If we do that, then maybe we end up just copy. No, we're not going to copy paste this. I guess we could still. Okay. So the third option would be that we pass in a component as a prop to diary meal, which I think I mentioned before as an option, right? A fourth idea would be to make the loading component here, but have it pass in a diary meal entry loading thing, or just a skeleton component into here, right? So there are options. I think ultimately too, we would probably want to have a diary meal entry.loading thing as well, that we can define over in this file. Okay, let's do this. So let's say just kind of debating internally which way I want to go with this. So we've already kind of gone down the path of this idea of having a .loading component available. Little background noise there. Having a .loading component on the thing, and that's kind of the API, and so you just use that, and you don't need to pass in anything else, and it just works. I guess the only thing we'd have to do here really is just, as we saw in the other one, we'll change the type signature of this to be just a function that takes diary meal props. Right. And then we can then we can say connected diary meal dot loading equals that, and yeah, then we just define that function. Copilot is thinking, maybe. Nope, it's given up. All right, fair enough. And so then we're gonna change. So I like doing it this way. I'm liking the idea of doing it this way, because effectively what we're going to do is we're going to add this API change. And I guess we are technically exporting this function, maybe just for testing purposes. But the interface of this component is this connected diary meal. And so we're not going to change kind of how we're expecting, like this prop change we're going to do internally is kind of it is an internal change, right? So then instead of taking diary meal entry, we'll say entry component, right? And then that's entry component is, yeah, that by default, right? And then we just have to change the type here to add that. Except it can't be optional. And that is a good guess. I don't know if that's something that we can import, though. No. Diary mail entry props. I guess we could export that so that we would be able to import it. Right, and now in our connected component, oh, I guess it does need to be optional, right? Because it can have a default. There, and so now the wrapper component doesn't need to change because the default will be this diary mail entry component that we were already using, right? But that means in diary mail loading, we can return something. That something being diary mail, like this, except we'll override what we pass in. We'll assume that there is a diary mail entry.loading. These functions are just going to be placeholders. These callbacks, because they don't need to do anything in this context. All right. Endable. Oh, there should be Boolean. False. Meal. Oh no, we don't need. I guess we need placeholder entries, right? Because the component is going to map over the entries. And they do need to have IDs because of the way the key prop works. But we can kind of cheat here if I just say as any. Of course, this dot loading does not exist yet. There we go. I must have closed that file. There we go. Bring that back. And now in diary mail entry, we're going to do a similar operation where we're going to create a function. I mean, it was already a function, but we're going to label it this way so that Typescript doesn't yell at us. And we just need to get rid of the arrow. And then it should all be exactly the same. And then is Copilot going to suggest something? Nope. Diary mail. Oh. Entry loading. Yep. Okay. Return skeleton. Oops. Skeleton. We'll try that. Okay, so now this provides a dot loading, which we can use here to pass in as the entry component. And we are also providing this as the dot loading of the connected meal, diary meal, which is the default export of this file. So here, then we need to provide things, dot loading. No, we don't, because we'll just use that, and then those skeletons can go away. Hello, Senorita? Senorita. I don't know how I should pronounce that. Maybe I'll stop trying, but hello, welcome to the chat. How's it going? Oh, thank you so much for the follow. We're we're inching towards our goal of 20 followers, which is kind of it's an in-between goal. The ultimate the slightly longer term goal is to have 50. So becoming an affiliate as possible, and that'll unlock VIP badges and some other stuff, and all of the fun stuff that you can do once you hit that milestone on Twitch. But I constantly forget everything I watched in tutorial after one day. Can you help, please? Yeah, I get that. That is something that I think you really just have to practice in some way. Even if it's, something, a silly little project, doesn't matter, but putting things into practice helps lock stuff in, right? So, that's kind of what I'm doing here, right? I've, not really done anything with React and Redux at this low level in my professional life in quite some time, because busy with other things and doing a bunch of stuff is already built for us, several years into projects. And so this has been something where I've been relearning about Redux and Redux Toolkit and, just building things not completely from the ground up, but more so than I usually get to do. And some of that is going and reading docs and, remembering or recalling or learning for the first time. I'd never used tRPC or Prisma before this project. I don't typically do a lot of consume a lot of tutorial-y things. I prefer to, come up with an idea for something and then just stumble my way through things until I hit roadblocks, and then then I start looking for resources. That's more my style. But I think just finding an excuse to apply the things that you're learning really helps you remember. Or trying to explain things to other people helps. If not, even if it doesn't help you figure out things, it helps you identify things that maybe you don't understand as well as you thought you did. Earlier in the stream where someone was asking, what is a Redux hook? Which is a long story, but also not something that's I have a really good answer off the top of my head for. I don't know if that helps with what you were saying at all about forgetting things, but I hope it does, at least a little bit. And look at that. While I've been sitting here talking, we see on the right-hand side our skeleton. Doesn't look too bad. Oh, hey, Dota. You go back and forth between the tutorial and my own project? Yeah, makes sense. I wonder, I would like for this add to be disabled while we're kind of in a loading mode. I wonder how feasible that is. Is that in Diary Meal? I think we should be able to do maybe we can have it disabled prop as well. By default it can be false so that we're not breaking how things already work. And then in loading, we can pass in disabled as true. Also, I just accept I'll forget a lot of whatever the tutorial said. Yeah. Yeah, I forget things all the time. As I demonstrate several times a week on stream. Also, Vivax 3794. Hello. Welcome. So many people in chat today. It's really cool. The more the merrier. All right, so this is looking pretty good as a loading skeleton thingy for the diary. I guess we could also have. Oh right, we only have one meal here. We could fix that though. Here. Yeah, we could just simulate this by having multiple. I don't know if that's. I think that makes sense. People will typically have like multiple meals set up. Like by default, the user that is created is going to have like probably breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Although I haven't created the like the user sign up account creation workflow yet, but I imagine that would be the case. So it would probably make sense for the loading skeleton for this view to start like this, because that will reduce the amount of like screen jank adjustment when data gets loaded. And this is immediately being used, right? Because we're already in our connected diary component, checking to see if we're loading and using this. So if I go back to the app and I refresh, yeah, we very briefly see a loading thing. Let me go full screen here, and I'll maybe break out the console into a separate window so it's kind of out of the way. And I'll also change the is it under network? I can turn on throttling. So 3G is pretty bad. I'll refresh. Let's see what this looks like. So this is like loading on 3G. Skeleton loaders are so cool. Yeah, it's a pet peeve of mine. Also, this loading is really slow. Maybe 3G is not good. DSL, what's it look like on DSL? A pet peeve of mine is when I'm on any kind of app and I'm navigating around, I'm about to click on something, like some kind of action, and in the middle of clicking on it, just as I tap it or click it or whatever interaction is, it moves because something loaded in. And then I click on something else and then it takes me to another screen. So mad when that happens. So loading skeletons are skeleton loaders, whichever way you want to say it, are a good thing. Now this is a dev build, so that it won't. Also, I have caching disabled. It's a lot of blank screen as things load. I don't think that'll be a thing on like an actual production build as much anyway. This is, I think, one of the things that like Next.js is supposed to solve for you in terms of like statically rendered stuff behind the scenes, so that you can quickly serve out kind of a unhydrated or maybe even a hydrated version of the page. And I'm just like not leveraging any of that in this app. Maybe just add an artificial delay in the maybe. Yeah, it's I think mostly we're just seeing the no throttling. We can see it very briefly, right? Let's see. How could we do that? That's how you tested it? Yeah. Fair. I mean, Yeah, we could probably do that, like in the fetch diary thunk. Or, I mean, if we want to just see it in the app, all we need to do is in the fulfilled case for fetch diary, we'll just change the loading to still be pending. There. That's what it looks like. I think maybe the skeletons here should be. Oh, I know what I did wrong. Maybe. Let's take a look. Well, maybe not wrong, but maybe not right either. So in the this lowest level component loading skeleton, I'm just returning a skeleton. It should probably be like it should be basically the whole table row with skeletons inside of it. For the various things. We don't need any of the logic though. Right, so just like table cells with skeletons inside of them, I think will, one, look better, and two, maybe we'll have the right height, maybe? Let's see what this looks like. Squiggly lines, but I think they'll go away. Okay, so there, that looks cool. All right, let me undo my change here. Now we have the opposite thing, like because we just have empty pages of data here. When you hit the page, there's actually more stuff in the loading skeleton than there is in the actual page. Maybe we should just have like one entry, right? That's what we did there, is we just have 3 entries. So now, yeah, that's better. Maybe. It's okay anyway. All right, so it's a bit of an adventure. The adventure. Okay, so what else? So that's the diary. That's one of the big things. That and like the consumption are kind of these 2 views in the app where there's like a lot going on, a lot of data, and kind of interaction going on. I don't know if there's anything else that we really need to do loading skeletons for here. I think we already looked at this one, right? And this one doesn't really change its layout depending on the data. Diary nav also doesn't, there's no data here, right? So, and then food search is just the search bar. It again doesn't change what it's showing based on data. It changes what it's showing based on interaction. Again, I don't have a camera set up to demo the UPC scanning. List builder. This is something that we're using in the settings page. Yeah, we already have a loading skeleton for it of a kind. So I think that might be basically everything we need to do. Right, there's also donut chart, but again, it's another thing that its layout doesn't change. I do really enjoy the animation on this though. Let's see. Total goal left chart. What's this? Okay, yeah. Over total. Yep, okay. But these don't, again, these don't change layout depending on the value, so that's fine. Diary meal is just this view again. All right, so I think that's basically it for adding more loading skeletons. In addition to that, I also upgraded Storybook Dark Mode and did some other tweaks to try to fix mock service workers, etc., etc. What changed here? Oh, we changed the... Oh, I see. This didn't need to change. This is the default export, so it could just stay the same. We can call it whatever we want within the scope of this page. Guessing the same thing happened here. So this is where I pressed F2 to like do a refactor rename. Apparently, if you do that in a file and that's the default export, VS Code will reach out and like rename it elsewhere, which was unnecessary. I just wanted to change it in this one file where it's the default export. And we added some loading stories. This was also something that didn't need to be changed. You know, I'll leave it like that. I think that's actually good in the context of the story to indicate, oh yeah, this is a connected component that we're trying to demo in the story. Okay, so I'm going to commit this with a generic commit message. Probably not a good practice, but enable auto merge, and we'll be done with this. And what's next? I still have no idea what's going on with mock service worker tRPC stuff. Maybe next time around I'll have a clue as to why it's not working. And we don't need to sit here watching this. This will do its build and Storybook push to chromatic and all that stuff. So back to the backlog. Up next, add story and interaction test for connected diary component. Well, we've already hit a roadblock with that, which is that our mock service worker stuff doesn't seem to be working. Let's see, what else is there? Handle auth failures. I can make this bigger. It's kind of maybe hard to read on stream. There we go. Handle auth failures and API calls automatically by sending user to holding view. Show loading state and prompt for relogin. So this is basically like if you're logged into the app and your session has expired and you try to do something, like you're on a page and you try to interact with, like you try to click add to breakfast. Oh yeah, that's nothing. Right, but then you like search for something, right? And this does the quick search where it goes to the back end and asks the DB, hey, what foods do we have in our local DB? That is an authenticated API endpoint. So you have to be authenticated to be able to do that search. So if we're not logged in and we try to do that search, it fails. So what does that look like? Well, let's simulate that by just logging out. Now in this view, the front end thinks we're still... The front end already knows that we're not logged in over here. But this is still going to allow us to do a search. And we get an error back, unauthorized. All right? So what we should do when we hit this is something. We should be, I don't know, taken to the login page. If you log in, then does that take you back to this view? How's that going to work? Do we superimpose another modal over everything? Like a thing I feel like I've seen done somewhere is like do a blurred background to hide all the data. I mean, it's not going to change the fact that the front end has that data. I mean, the very conservative way of doing it is say, oh, well, this user is not logged in anymore. Let's delete everything that's in the Redux store, like wipe everything out. It could be some other user that's like come along. You left your computer unlocked. I don't know if we need to carry it that far. I'm too used to thinking of these things for work, where that's. I won't go into detail about that, but let's say that's more of a concern. In a things I do for my day job. So for this though, we should do something to be like, oh, the user's not logged in. Let's help them get logged back in. We do have a login page, or we have a login thing that takes you to sign in with Discord right now. Brought to you. No, I won't say brought to you. That sounds like a sponsorship thing, which nothing I'm doing is sponsored. No one is paying me money. Which should be a surprise to no one. In the context of streaming, anyway. How are we doing authentication? We're using a package called NextAuth, I thought. I want to say that's true. NextAuth? Yes. Let me jog my memory. So we have some middleware. Sure. We have some things where we're using NextAuth to sign in and sign out from our navigation. We have session provider. We have a NextAuth Pages API auth page. We have authentication.ts. Just trying to remember how this all works. It's been a while since I've looked at this. Okay. So this is happening on the back end, right? And that's why we have it in the server folder. Like all the back end stuff, all the tRPC procedures, and all of our other stuff is in the back end folder. And so is this authentication.ts. We have Git server auth session. We're providing us a default export there. We're providing this API auth thing, which is then just calling out to NextAuth with our auth options from that file we were just looking at. And then we are calling sign in and sign out, right? So when you click the login or log out in the nav of the app over here, that just ends up calling handle login or handle logout, which then in turn calls sign in or sign out, which is provided by NextAuth for React. And we are passing in the callback URL of origin of our current location. So what does that do? Right, so when we click that, it took us to API auth sign in, which is that page that we're providing within the context of Next.js, which is then handing off to NextAuth to like render out this thing that if we had multiple sign-in methods would be listed here. How would we do that if we wanted to like have a modal that wraps that? Is that even possible? So let's look at NextAuth. Maybe. Let's take a look. If I right-click this and just like see what's going on here. I mean, it's just a form, right? That submits to API auth something. Again, basically the API endpoint that we're or endpoints that we're providing via that page that then calls into next auth. So could we ask next auth basically for this UI element and then embed it inside of a modal here? Is a question. Pages. There is theming. It's nice. In order to get available authentication providers and URLs from the user, you can make a request to the API endpoint. So what is this supposed to represent? Pages, auth sign in with provider name, click, sign in provider ID. And then get server-side props, which is getting, okay, so we're gonna call get server session, which we're getting from next auth next. If the user's already logged in, yada, yada, yada. We can call get providers inside of get server-side props. I don't... I mean, I think at the end of the day, what's going to happen, right? If you are logged out, whatever you do, unless we were to like open, like we could present like a, oh, you need to log in, and then whatever interaction happens, it like opens in a separate like pop-out window. Because otherwise it's going to result in like us navigating away. If this were a different app where we're doing like a lot of data entry or something where it would be much more painful to like navigate away, maybe I would invest more time in this. But I think for this right now, I'm feeling like it might be worthwhile. If we get that unauthenticated error, we should just redirect to the like we just trigger the sign in that takes us to this page. And yeah, that's going to be kind of a little unfriendly, but I mean, there's nothing really else to be done there. I think this is going to require some further thought, right? So I think what I've observed so far. Oh, cool. We can check in on chromatic as well. Let me take some notes here, right? So how do we handle this one? So the question 3 weeks ago, I think we looked at this like 3 streams ago. How do we handle errors when our tRPC query in the front end gets an unauthorized error without adding logic? Without adding that logic to any UI components was the question last time, right? Because it's one thing when one of our thunks in Redux gets the error, we can just like use Redux to handle that. But there are still places where we call, like we use the tRPC, like use tRPC query or whatever it's called within a component to pull data. And if one of those queries gets an error, how are we handling that? And I guess I still don't have an answer. Can we wrap the tRPC call in some way to dispatch an error? You know, basically, whatever request goes to the back end, we want to see if we get back an error. And we want to dispatch an action so that Redux can do something based on that, right? And I don't know how to do that. Okay, other issue. We are going to need to, we are likely going to need open a new window to complete auth so that the user is not forced to navigate away and lose their current state UI state. Right, that's what we're trying to avoid. We're trying to make this this is really transparent, so that you are in the middle of filling out your diary for the day, like you're adding stuff, and then something comes up, and you come back like a month later. You're logged out. I don't know how long the sessions are good for. Is another thing. Probably a long time. Maybe this is not worth dealing with right now, honestly, given the complexity that we're already dealing with. I'm gonna leave this comment here, and I think I'm gonna move this. I'm gonna move this out of our milestone into a different milestone, and I'm gonna put it back in the icebox, because having said all that, and spent just a bunch of time thinking about this, I don't think this is gonna be a big deal until it does happen in some rare instance, and then it'll be a big deal to that person in that moment, maybe. But that's life. Okay. Now, having talked myself out of some work, let's look at some other work. Also, so if I sign in now. Yep. All right, now I'm logged in. If I go back over here, hey, look, the nav is back. It just works. And then this should also work. Yep. No error. Great. So if we could have some way of popping up a window, I mean, I guess that could be it, right? Just pop up a window and then do the auth in there. Something. Huh. Oh, right. But the other issue is still that we don't have a way to consistently see when we're getting back an unauthorized error. We would have to reach into the tRPC client somehow, maybe, to do that. I guess... No, I just said that it's not worth spending time on, so I'm not going to spend any more time on it. We'll someday, maybe. Okay, so Chromatic says there have been changes. Resources requested by the news story could not be loaded. Oh, well, it's a news story. Okay, so yeah, we added this story. Cool, that looks right. And here's the news story for the diary view as well. Looks just like what we saw before. And whoops, what's going on here? Unexpected token is not valid JSON. Diary basic. Okay. So what does that look like locally? Diary basic. No, that's consumption loading. Diary basic. Oh, hey, look. We also get the error locally. What's going on here? Oh, I think it's the... Okay, that's interesting. This error wasn't happening before. Let's check something out really quick. Check out main. Get there have been changes. So let's just npm install from what was in main 2 commits ago. Let's figure out if this issue with mock service worker and stuff that's messing with our stories. I feel like this, yeah. See, that works. All right. So if I pull down those 2 commits and npm install again, That's fine. Now, if I check out issue 190 and npm install, yeah. Whoops. I broke. I need to restart Storybook anyway. But yeah, it seems like whatever we're doing in this PR has broken things. Building. Ceiling emitting, yada yada yada. Yeah, okay. So what's changed altogether in this pull request? So we did this today. Yeah, some other changes. So package JSON. We upgraded Storybook dark mode. Did that somehow break this? What if we switch it back? Just to be sure, let me stop and start Storybook. Look, a new version of Storybook is available. Will it fix a problem or cause new ones? Yeah, and this is why I updated Storybook dark mode at the beginning of the stream, is because it was giving me a warning, right? Like, it might not be compatible. Okay. But I was not getting this error before. Okay. Let's take a look here. So in our pull request, right? So we opened this PR last stream, right? And so here's the commit we opened. Pending, one change must be accepted as baseline, right? So here we published, 47 tests unchanged. So whatever changed is in this commit. Whatever we broke it today. So there's this change to Storybook dark mode, and the other change was in the preview. We changed to using loaders instead of decorators. So I'm gonna revert that. I guess the other possibility is we have a lot of places where we're using a caret for the version number, and I guess it's possible that something 7.0.18, 7.0.20 is available. All right, but we have a package lock, so we wouldn't have bumped automatically. Okay, well, anyway. So I undid that. Did that. It changed this around again in order. Did the story change? Oh, maybe. Okay, let me just discard all those changes. diary. So this is in templates diary, which I think the actual story did change here in templates diary. So maybe, oh right, it did, because we added this thing, error while loading. Yeah, right. So that's not that's this is something that I intentionally added, right? So that if there's an error, we'll show that instead of the diary. So what's happened here is that the mock service worker intercepting of tRPC has been broken for a while, but what I've done is I've introduced a change to the UI to actually show the error, and so now Storybook / Chromatic is telling us that the UI has changed. Well, yes. I guess for right now, I'm going to say, yes, I'll accept this. Because it's behaving correctly in terms of the things we've changed. Okay, and now this is merged. Great. Hold on, I want to keep a tab open with my, oh, I have that right here, pull requests. So we have a new up next item for the next stream, which is fix tRPC mock service worker. Because we're not going to be able to really pursue like more interaction tests and all of that stuff until this whole situation with our mocking is working again. Apparently it's been broken for a while though, which is unfortunate. In that we didn't, realize it. Whoops. Okay. Well, it's getting close to lunchtime for me, and that's usually my signal that I've streamed for long enough. So I want to thank everyone for coming out to the stream, chatting, participating, asking questions, all of that. I have a new thing for my stream ending thing that I'm gonna kick off, and we'll see if it works. It's like a credits thing that hopefully will work. We'll see. Let me yeah, we're gonna see if this works. Fingers crossed. There we go. Credits. All right, seems to be working. So thanks a lot, everyone who followed. Getting closer to that goal of 20, and then our next goal of 50 as well. So anyway, I'll be streaming again tomorrow. Not in the morning though, and the evening time for me after work is done. Doing some modded Minecraft, pursuing more things in Create Astral, the mod pack, and then that again on Wednesday, and then Friday currently doing X4, first time playing that game, or rather continuing that playthrough, my first playthrough, and then the schedule repeats again next week for me anyway. I have Monday, a week from tomorrow, off from work, so I'll probably be doing something a little bit different for streaming that day. Details still TBD. It's not going to be like I did the on Memorial Day where it was like a 12-hour stream. I don't know how many of those I have in me in a year, but it's too soon for another one of those. But probably do something extra, a little bit extra in a week. So we'll just have to wait and find out what that is actually going to be. So again, thanks everyone for everything, and until next time, take care. Bye-bye.